Hello, everyone. My name is Jan Natividad, and welcome to my session. Again, mistakes were made, applying lessons learned in growth marketing to your own development. Excited to have everyone here, and I really appreciate everyone taking a short 30-minute break to listen to me today. A bit about me first. Again, my name's Jan. I am oh gosh, I see myself on the screen. I'm a I like to call myself a professional experiential learner. And I mean that in more ways than one. Firstly, I am a growth marketer. For those of you who aren't as familiar with what that job entails, I'm essentially responsible for running a bunch of experiments to help drive growth across the entire funnel for the startup that I work for. And then speaking of that startup, I work at, it says Lawrence at the top, did not finish the slide, really. I work at an edtech startup here in Vancouver called Riipen. We have a platform that's part marketplace where we connect companies with educators and students at post-secondary institutions for experiential learning engagements. And then part of it, the other part of it is a project management platform to help keep track of those engagements. We help make experiential learning a bit more accessible for students in schools, as well as companies, whether you're a large enterprise or a small startup. We're on a mission to end graduate underemployment and unemployment. So as you can see, experiential learning is very much in my blood. And what I'm going to be doing is sharing some tips with all of you on experiential learning and growth marketing, and then applying that to your own personal development, your professional career, your own startup journey, or pretty much any time you make mistakes in your life, all right? So let's get started. Making mistakes. This probably goes without saying, but making mistakes is easy, like really, really easy. If there's something that you can easily do in your day, it's make a mistake. But it's one of the best ways to learn. You learn firsthand what works and what doesn't. And because you're learning from experience. This is also known as experiential learning. For example, just to give a bit more of context on what experiential learning is, as a kid, how do you know that you shouldn't touch a hot stove? With traditional learning, that would be when your parent tells you, hey, this stove is hot, don't touch it. That's traditional learning. And then experiential learning is you yourself as the kid touching the hot stove, burning yourself, and then learning not to touch a hot stove ever again. So yeah, if you're like me though, you're probably not someone who likes or enjoys making mistakes. It might even scare you a little. The anxiety caused by making mistakes, or even the sheer idea of making a mistake, can lead us to inaction. It might feel better not to do anything, but let's be honest, that pain of regret really eats you up, and sometimes it's even worse than that shorter term pain of trying and then making that mistake. The funny thing is, we all make mistakes at work all the time, and we kind of brush it off. As a growth marketer, I mess up every single day. The funny thing is, I often don't call it a mistake. I tend to reframe it as an experiment where the results didn't quite match up with a hypothesis. For my fellow marketers out there, you're probably familiar with what I'm talking about, which is the split or A/B test. This is where you're trying something new because you think it'll perform well, and then testing that against a control. Maybe you're testing a new call to action to see if it gets more click, trying different copy to see if it increases conversions, seeing if a new image increases time on page, whatever. Sometimes the test works, sometimes it doesn't, and then when it doesn't, you start to realize how much resources you poured into seeing if this idea works or not. You know, that's a lot of precious time, effort, money, just all down the drain. Most people would just call this a mistake, and that's it. However, mistakes aren't always a bad thing. One of the biggest differences between a good mistake and a bad mistake is how you set yourself up for that mistake and then how you recover from it. So let's dive into this. In growth marketing, a fairly common and simple framework is test, learn, scale. This was first introduced to me by a mentor at Google, and I'm sure a lot of you are already using this. You might call it the same thing, test, learn, scale. You might be calling it something different. When you make mistakes, both big and small in your life, you can start using this similar framework as well. Let's dive into each one. First one being test. To run a good experiment, you need to take the time to set yourself up for success. A solid experiment starts with your hypothesis, your prediction, your objective, and your expected outcome. When I'm setting up experiments at Riipen, this is exactly how I like to do it. You know, your hypothesis, this is what you believe to be true. For example, let's say we see that signups aren't doing too well. A hypothesis for this could be that customers aren't completing the sign-up process because it might be a bit too long. Prediction. My prediction is that if we shorten the number of fields they have when they fill out the sign-up form, then they will be more likely to sign up because of that. And then my main objective with this is to increase the completed sign-up rate. And then the expected outcome, this is where you quantify that objective and give it a number, like throw a number out there. Let's say, for example, 10% increase is what I expect and what I would define as successful. Okay, great. Hypothesis, prediction, objective, expected outcome. What does this translate to in real life, though? It feels kind of weird using the scientific method in your day-to-day. So instead, what I like to do is ask myself these three questions. The first one is, what's the problem? So the pain point you're trying to alleviate. The second one is, what do you want to happen? Think about your ideal state, and then think about your current state, and then look at that gap in between those two different states. And then finally, what does success look like? These are the kind of concrete things you need to observe or experience to tell if this experiment worked. For me, this year has been a really big year of tests, change, and making mistakes. I'm sure it has been for many of you. A little bit about my own personal journey. Earlier this year, I asked myself these very three questions. What was the problem? The problem I had, the pain point I was trying to alleviate was that I felt a bit stagnant. I felt stuck. I'm sure this is a feeling that many of you must feel. Maybe you're feeling maybe you're feeling it now. Maybe you felt it before. But for me specifically, I felt stuck when it came to something that used to be such a big passion of mine, which is writing and sharing stories. Don't get me wrong, I was doing a ton of writing at work, but I never felt inspired to tell stories outside of the ones I was getting paid to do. Second, what did I want to happen? I wanted to be in a state where, and I know this sounds a little strange, I wanted to be in a state where I felt challenged. Sticking to the status quo in my personal life is exactly what led me to feeling stuck and uninspired. And then the final question is, what does success look like? This is a bit vague, but success to me looked like taking more risks when it came to sharing my stories with more people. As you can see, defining success is a bit more abstract when it comes to your personal life. As a marketer, metrics is the best way to indicate success. Conversion rates, click rates, sign-up rates, all of these different data points, you just have to choose which one's the most important and most relevant to the experiment. However, real life is a bit more challenging to put into numbers. However, one number you can't miss out on is a timeline. How long are you going to give yourself to get from your current state to your ideal state? Make sure you give yourself a reasonable and realistic amount of time. Second thing to note is that as you think about these things, rather, you need to put this through a filter of, is this worth doing? Are you doing something because it's meaningful, or are you doing something because it's different? It's absolutely great if you're doing something that's both meaningful and different, but if you're only doing something because it's different and you're just like, let's try this out, then you might want to reprioritize. Your resources are extremely scarce. If you're having some trouble figuring out what to do, what to prioritize, my favorite personal way to determine if something is worth doing is imagining a little matrix like this. Imagine the value that this test provides and then the effort it takes to accomplish this. You want to focus on the things that provide high value for little effort. Prioritize these things. For things that provide a high value but also require high effort, you want to make time for these. And then things that provide low value, they honestly just aren't worth pursuing, especially if it takes a lot of effort to accomplish. So great. Once you determine that the cost is worth it, then you're ready to move on to the next step, which is to go for it. In the middle of the year, I went for it. I made a few changes in my personal life, and most significantly, I started saying yes to things I normally declined because they were way out of my comfort zone, but I knew it would take me closer to my ideal state. One of the most notable steps I took was applying to speak and share my story at the HubSpot Inbound conference this year. For those of you who are unfamiliar, Inbound is a yearly conference held by HubSpot in Boston. It typically attracts like tens of thousands of people around the world. And this year, just like many other conferences, just like VSW, they had to go virtual, but they still had over 70,000 people attend worldwide. Applying to this conference was a bit of a stretch for me. I'm usually used to sharing my stories with friends and family, and going from a group of 10 people to a group of potentially hundreds and thousands of people was challenging and risky for sure, but I knew this is something I wanted to do. And guess what? I was chosen as a speaker, and literally this time last week, I was sharing my story at Inbound with all of these people. So take that leap, make that change, try that new thing, and give yourself a chance to step towards something that's both different and meaningful. Great. So the next step in the framework is learn. This part is so often overlooked. The most successful teams and people aren't the ones who go full steam ahead 100% of the time. They're the ones who take the time to slow down so they can go even faster afterwards. They can speed up afterwards. People and product teams out there are probably familiar with the retrospective. Other teams might call this a postmortem or a project debrief. Whatever you call it, however you structure it, it's essentially a dedicated moment to reflect. Give yourself a chance to think about what you learned, especially in real life when there's when it's a bit more challenging to quantify success. That reflection piece is super, super important. Revisit those 3 questions you asked yourself in the very beginning. What's the problem? What do you want to happen? What does success look like? Look at those again. And then taking the time to properly reflect will allow you to see everything that you learned. Big changes are going to be the most obvious, because obviously, yeah. However, there are also going to be what I like to call smaller nuggets of wisdom that are equally valuable. I can't tell you how many times I've done something like change the subject line on an email and I get a jump in open rates and I'm super happy about it. I'm over the moon about it. But then I missed out on the smaller but still important things like how our customers interacted with the content that I shared in the email. And then after you did all this reflection, what's even better is to actually write this all down. Journal it, document it, put it in your diary, put it somewhere. It not only helps you solidify what you learned, but it gives you something to revisit and to refer to in the future. You don't want to make the same mistakes more than once. And yeah, for me, I worked at a startup for most of my career. There would be times when I felt like I had a pretty difficult and grueling couple of weeks just grinding, doing the same thing over and over and over. I'm sure many of you in your own startup journey kind of feel the same way. Whether you're in a startup right now, whether you're looking for a job, trying to join a startup, you might be feeling the same way. However, something I did was I took the time to sit down and reflect. Once I do, I start to see my progress. You know, maybe I saw that I learned how to use a new tool. I worked closely with a colleague and developed a stronger bond with them. I discovered something new that I enjoyed doing. When most people think of growing throughout their life, it's so easy to visualize it as this line graph that moves from the bottom left to the top right, which, I mean, at the end of the day, it kind of is. However, when you actually zoom in, it looks a little bit more like this. There are these peaks and valleys. It's never just a completely straight line up. Each one of those dips you see is a lesson learned, and then each point helped bring you to where you are today. Reflection is a super, super important part of this whole process. And then the final piece in the framework is scale. This is what you're going to be doing moving forward from the things that you've learned. Basically, you're asking yourself, what aspects from your experience can you 10x? If things turned out well, then it could be as simple as putting even more resources into it. For example, when I do performance marketing and I'm running an ad and it does really, really well, first I figure out why it did well, but then afterwards I just double down on it. I add more I add more money into that ad. If things didn't turn out so well and you're faced with I've made a huge mistake moment, then surprisingly, there's still things that you can actually 10x. This is where those smaller nuggets of wisdom come in. Maybe you learned to never do things a certain way. Maybe you learned about your own personal limits. Maybe you learned that things require more resources to become successful. All of these are all lessons that you can apply to your current life and your future tests as well. For me, when I set out to feel unstuck in the beginning of the year, I myself hit roadblock after roadblock. Sometimes I felt even more stuck than I did before. I made so many mistakes. However, one small nugget of wisdom I learned over the past couple of months was to reframe situations. There's always more than one way to look at things. When, for example, when things turn bad, I don't think about how I failed, I think about how I fought. When I embarrass myself, I forget about being humiliated. I appreciate that I was humbled. And finally, when I start to feel like I'm losing control a bit, it's not about feeling frustrated. It's about being excited for a fresh perspective. So yeah, basically my personal mantra for the past couple of months has been and still is, mess up, but don't let it mess you up. Yeah, that's it. Test, learn, scale. Make sure what you do matters, learn, slow down to speed up, and then scale, 10x what you learn. One final skill that you can adopt from marketers that I'll share with you is the ability to tell a really good story. Some of the best marketers I know are incredible storytellers, and that makes sense because that's how you get a brand out there. In your life, you deserve to tell the best story that you can as well. What's the more compelling story? Is it the one where the main character easily overcomes every obstacle in their way? Or is it the one where the main character struggles, makes mistakes, but becomes stronger because of them? Your audience want the more interesting story. Every mistake you make adds to that story. Remember that making mistakes is not failing. Making mistakes is about growing and learning. Thank you. Yeah, I guess I'll open up the floor to questions now. Let's see if there are any questions. Andre asked the question. Oh.
I'm just on standby in case you miss anything,
Yeah.
but
Okay,
yes.
for sure. I see one question from Andre. How have your personal values guided the goals you set for yourself? That's a really good question. Your personal values are a super important part of this whole process, and I should have added this into the presentation, but basically add that as add your personal values as another filter for yourself to make sure that what you're doing is not just different and meaningful, but also something that stands true to who you are. VC asked a question. Can you comment on the concept of reframing? Yeah, reframing. It's basically just looking at something at a different angle, from a different perspective. Oh, how do you do it? That's it's a key part of it is kind of just taking a moment to sit down and reflect. Not just reflect, but to sit down and take a breath is what I mean. For example, like examples I gave was when things go bad, your very first gut reaction is to go, everything is going really badly. I'm frustrated. I'm mad. I'm angry. This is awful. Instead, what you should do is kind of take the moment to sit down and breathe a bit, and then go, okay, wait, things did turn bad, but what else does this mean? If one door closes, I'm sure hundreds of other doors must be open as well. I just have to look for them. I just have to find them. So taking that moment to sit down and kind of think, okay, if this didn't work out for me, what else is working out for me, or what else can work out for me? So that's a sort of a short way to go about it. But overall, just that reflection and taking the moment to step back a bit is super, super important, because you can be very much in your own head during those moments, in your own emotions. So slow down a bit, and that'll help out. Any other questions here? Viv, I'm not sure if you're back, but let me know if you saw any questions that I might have missed.
I'm back.
Perfect.
Sorry, kind of disconnected for me for a quick second. No, I just see the questions from Andre and BC.
Okay, awesome.
If anyone has any more questions, we still have a couple minutes left. You can throw it in the chat.
Tell us more about Riipen.
Great question, Michael.
Great question, Michael. Well, Riipen, it's kind of funny because I don't believe I work with you, Michael, but Riipen is...
I love it that Michael asked that.
Right. Riipen, we're an experiential learning platform. So if you're a startup, or if you're a startup and you want to, for example, if you want some extra capacity to work on some projects, a great way to do that is to work with students to help you out with your business growth objectives. So we have two different types of projects. We have project-based learning inside the classroom. So you can present your project to students and they work on it in the classroom with the help of a professor. So that could be like a marketing project where students help you out creating your social media strategy, or like a data analytics project where you have a bunch of data and you ask students to help you out with figuring out what your next step should be. And then we also, because of COVID actually, so this relates to the session we had yesterday, because of COVID, we started introducing virtual internships. This is an opportunity to kind of work with students in a virtual setting. And because of the network we have, we work with about over 200 schools across the world. You could be in Vancouver, but you could be working with students in Toronto, and Texas, and Australia, or even the UK. So yeah, if you're interested, feel free to reach out to me. It's completely free for startups and companies to join.
There's also a booth for Riipen in our virtual expo. So if you want to go check out their website or learn even a little bit more, you can always pop over to the expo and get in touch with them there. There's how did that presentation to 70,000 people go? What were the major takeaways?
Yeah, so that presentation was a bit weird. So with Inbound, they had they had hundreds of speakers as well, because obviously they have tens of thousands of people joining. So my session was pre-recorded. So it was a bit weird where I pre-recorded and I just watched myself when it actually happened live. But overall, it was a bit nerve-wracking. I feel if it was actually happening in real life, where I actually had to fly out to Boston to do it, I would be sweating even more. So this was a good kind of in between. I think by next year, if I get into Inbound again, I'll be more prepared for real life kind of presentation.
We're just going to have to get Startup Week to the point where we have 70,000 people for you, Jen.
Exactly. Just invite everyone from Vancouver.
Everyone.
Yeah.
And then Andre goes, how much do we pay to run these projects?
Andre, it's free for companies if they want to join. This is all about a value exchange between students and companies. Students get that experience to apply their skills into a real life project, and then on the other end, companies gain value from students to help them with their business growth objectives. So it's free for companies, just as long as you're coming in with the expectation to help these students learn and grow as well.
Okay, is that it for questions?
I see a few more.
No, it has been working so well so far.
When you were down, what were the top, say, 5 resources that got you out of that state? Okay, that's a really good question. I'm blanking on 5, but the first thing that comes to mind is your own network, the people that really, really matter to you and who are willing to kind of sit down with you and talk about what's happening, because they're kind of a bouncing board. And don't just talk with people who are going to listen. Talk to people who will challenge you as well. I have friends who, when I'm down, they'll say, "Oh, I'm really sorry," and they'll listen and they'll understand. And then I have friends who kind of kick me a bit and say, "Get out of this mindset. You need to pick yourself up and kind of go for it." And I like having that little mix of a little bit of both perspectives. So there's one side where they let me have that moment of sadness, and then there's the other friend who helps me kind of push me out of that moment. So that's definitely something important. And then another thing is just reflect. You might be down, but there might be things that you learned from this experience, or things that came out of this experience that was a positive experience.